You're telling me it took Osama bin Laden to actually get Roger Ebert shit together on David Lynch?
Thorin, all I'm going to say is Osama bin Laden caused Chicago to win Best Picture. We're on to our third David Lynch film here on Foreplay, and that will be Lost Highway from 1997. Thorin here, a very strong proponent for Lost Highway. This is your favorite of his films. Why?
I mean, I actually think, first of all, it does actually... First of all, looks fabulous. I think it's got an amazing soundtrack, which we'll get into. I think in general, his style, I think this is the most stylish David Lynch film. We did Wild at Heart before. I thought that had like a lot of flair to it. This one really peaks for me. I actually feel like if this film had been bigger and it had been like some Pulp Fiction-esque sort of like, oh my God, super blockbuster, I think it could have completely changed this guy's whole career. I think he would have way more funding. He would be the sort of person where he might be thought of as like a Paul Thomas Anderson, but he could just always do whatever films he wanted. Whereas I always thought the tragedy of David Lynch was, for me, it starts to arc down a bit after this because I think his films just get a bit more surrealistic and harder for people to engage with. But for me, this is like the sweet spot. It's a very surrealistic film, but it's one where I feel like you can just watch it as a turbo normie and just be like, it's just fucking stylish. It's just fun, isn't it? Like, you don't have to know what it's all about. So I think it's just one where I also think, by the way, what an unbelievable cast. It's got like some really good actors and actresses in, but no one who sort of like overpowers the piece. But then it's literally got people in like background roles where you're like, Richard Pryor's in this. Like, it's got Gary Busey. It's got names you don't even remember in it. Like, I feel like this must be the sweet spot where, a la Tarantino, people are just saying to David, like, can I be in your film, basically? Because that's the secret in Hollywood, if you don't know. It's that once you make the really good films that people appreciate, they're all just followers. They all just rush in and try and make the film with you, which is why the joke is half the people have made their Scorsese film about 15 years too late. It's like, you should have gotten in when he was actually fucking the best, mate. So to me, it's just the sweet spot of everything. The surrealism, the fucking style, the music, the performances are great. I even think, by the way, we'll get to this later, it's one of the only films he made where it doesn't particularly actually have a lot of lightness to it or any sort of like innocence to it. To me, it's actually one of the darkest ones he made, which I also think, unfortunately, probably did, we talked about this past episodes, I think actually is what made his overwhelming sort of like perception to the public that he's just making all these dystopian nightmare fuel films and stuff, where this one is within that wheelhouse, but I think it's very well done.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen this one in a while. Certainly out of all of the movies in this arc, it's the one that I have the most time between the last time I saw it, easily 10 years. So I conservatively, you know, so I didn't know what I was I don't know what I was expecting going back into it. I was very pleasantly surprised. I mean, first of all, what struck me immediately was just how good it looks. It is easily, with the exception of Mulholland Drive, it's arguably David Lynch's best looking film.
It really feels like he has, like, if we watch Wild at Heart and Blue Velvet, you can see the evolution of his style, where it really feels like this is the peak of David Lynch's signature cinematography and kind of feel and ambiance.
I would also say, though, this one is very, very stylish, and it's got a richness to the way it's shot. We were talking about this before we went live. I don't know what camera or film or whatever it was that David Lynch used for this, but it looks immediately different. It has like a very different texture to all of his other films in terms of how it's shot. This looks like a big production Hollywood movie. I mean, I couldn't find how much budget was allocated for this, because obviously, as with a lot of David Lynch's films, it was kind of funded and distributed by various bits and pieces. It was like something David Lynch put together. Like, the production company for this is a French production company called like DB 2000 or something, which obviously don't do a lot of mainstream Hollywood movies. And so it was a box office bomb. I mean, that much.
It's crazy in itself. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly crazy to think, like, what, off the back of Twin Peaks mania, a film by the guy that made Twin Peaks, no one's interested in it. Critics weren't interested in it. Viewers weren't interested in it, which is also just insane. But I mean, look, right out the gate, for all of the people that have followed this arc, you will know you're watching a movie that feels like a big budget movie with a big cast. Everything's really, really well shot. And so, yeah, you definitely see the evolution of the filmmaker in this one, no doubt about that.
Wow, I looked it up. It's only $15 million budget.
Yeah, looks
Fucking up
great.
for like 97. That's crazy.
Yeah, looks
Wow.
great as well. Yeah. I mean, also as well, I'll say to Duncan's point. I mean, one of the things I always love about David Lynch is the way that he can take these. You can't say they're ensemble casts because they're not all leads. But one of the things David Lynch historically does very well is he finds small roles for really good character actors, memorable roles, interesting roles, and he will cast people in those roles. I mean, like Robert Loggia in this movie is fucking hilarious. Like, I mean, hilarious and menacing in the way that kind of like, Dennis Hopper was in Blue
Yeah.
Velvet. He's kind of the equivalent of that. He is the menacing crime lord that just looms in the background of the story. But I mean, like, he's really like memorable in it. Like, I mean, I don't know if maybe Dennis Hopper would have been considered for this role, and maybe they went a different way or whatever. It has that kind of feel to it. But yeah, there's like a ton of like really good, just memorable, moments in this. Like everyone gets some really good scenes, and it's kind of a bit of a weird movie for Bill Pullman to be in. Like you're doing an avant-garde David Lynch surrealist movie. When usually when you think of Bill Pullman, you think of fucking Independence Day or Casper the Friendly Ghost. He's been in a lot of very mainstream, or he's in that fucking baseball movie as well, about the women's team. He's like he plays
League
like
of
kind of
Their
every
Own.
man. Yeah, he plays like every man roles. He's like that's what he does. In this, he's playing a sleazy saxophonist that probably killed his wife and is then sent to the chair for it. So I mean, it's a super interesting film and was very enjoyable to watch. Another one where the 2 hour plus runtime just flew by for me.
Easy.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and as we dive into, I mean, this is the part of David Lynch's career where, if you watched Wild at Heart and thought to yourself, well, that's pretty surreal, or maybe it's very hard for me to understand the narrative of this film, or it gets extremely abstract. I mean, you're going to really struggle with this, and especially Mulholland Drive, because this is kind of the warm up for Mulholland Drive, which is even weirder and even more surreal in a lot of ways. But also, I mean, this is what makes his films, I think, really interesting to discuss, because they end up being psychological experiments. And we'll talk about what David Lynch said directly about this film. But also, I do want to point out to people that if you guys didn't watch the Blue Velvet episode, I started that episode reading the obituary that Kyle MacLachlan wrote in the New York Times that was about David Lynch's philosophy about not explaining his films or letting the audience interpret them. And I would go back and either read that article or listen to the excerpt that I read from it in that episode, because that's where it's really going to apply, is this film and the next one, Mulholland Drive. And no doubt we will spend a lot of time on this podcast discussing our theories about what happens in this movie, because it is very ambiguous at the end.
Yeah, I mean, look, just for a little bit of context as well, because ultimately it's a story about a musician that may or may not have killed his wife, that is then terrorized by external forces, including the mystery man, which, by the way, another staple of David Lynch. There's always just one
external
guy.
Forces.
There's always one guy that has supernatural powers that you just feel like is sort of evil incarnate, in some inexplicable form. And then ultimately, while he's waiting in the cell, he switches out and becomes someone else, and then finds himself in the remnants of his previous life. He plays a guy called Fred. Fred disappears, he becomes Pete, then Pete turns back into Fred. And so there is a lot of these confusing elements to it. One of the things that I did find super interesting when I was researching this, David Lynch actually said when he was writing this movie with Barry Gifford, he was inspired to create this movie because the O.J. Simpson trial was on at the time.
What a great analogy, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll read you. I got a quote from this is from Catching the Big Fish, which is David Lynch's book. And it says here, at the time that Barry Gifford and I were writing the script for Lost Highway, I was sort of obsessed with the O.J. Simpson trial. By the way, everyone was. It was the first time a trial of this nature had been televised. So just a bit of context there for the Zoomers.
By the way, since it was about 10 years ago it came out, if you remember A-League was when they did that original one. The problem is they later made that one where it was like a reenactment biopic. No. What you want to watch is the one me and Richard watched in like 2016, the one where they did the like whole
What was it,
trial.
Made in America or something?
Yeah, I think that was it. That was mega. That was actually like a proper, like sort of like fucking proper history of that trial. It's mega in depth. Yeah, rewatch it.
It was great coming into the E-League green room and me and Duncan just doing O.J. Simpson jokes for the whole day. Everyone loved that. Great material. But anyway, it goes on and says, Barry and I never talked about it this way, but I think the film is somehow related to that. What struck me about O.J. Simpson was that he was able to smile and laugh. He was able to go golfing later with seemingly very few problems about the whole thing. I wonder how, if a person did these deeds, he could go on living. And we found this great psychology term, psychogenic fugue, describing an event where the mind tricks itself into escape from some horror. So in a way, Lost Highway is about that, and also the fact that nothing can stay hidden forever. And so ultimately, David Lynch, who never...
I didn't ever said it on camera because that is the theory.
Yeah, he said it in a video interview as well. He says that Lost Highway is a psychogenic, or what I think is currently called a dissociative fugue.
Yeah, we call it fugue state, dissociative state, dissociative fugue. Yeah, exactly. Various terms for it. So it's kind of interesting because ultimately I think one of the Lost Highway might be deceptively simple in the sense that I remember at the time interpreting very much in what he says there, although I hadn't come across the quote back in the 90s or the noughties, whenever I last watched this movie. And it's super interesting because I think narratively that really works and it really makes sense. And if you view it as one character essentially having done something awful, killed his wife, and then creates a whole story about why he did it based on he has to be another character to kind of walk through the rationale. The movie absolutely makes complete coherent sense, which is sort of a terrifying thing to think about, really.
By the way, bro, that's even something. We'll just get into it now. I guess we don't have to fucking do any foreplay, quite literally in this sense. It's going in fucking dry. So the thing I would say is, that's the weirdest thing, is this is one of the films, Mulholland Drive takes it up to the next level, where the whole thing is, people are going to dismiss it. I can see why it's a box office flop. Like, didn't even make sense. Who the fuck was that guy? And why was his head all shot? And then also, like, is she the same woman? Her hair is blonde now. She was like, bro, you're not even trying. Like, listen, I'm not the guy who does that thing I told you. I don't like the whole thing that the fucking literature teacher does in school where they're like, their use of cut red in the scene was to represent the anger and the martial thought. I think that goes too far sometimes. I think what you're doing there is you've got your own model and you insert it over the top of things. And sometimes there's correspondences that can be good sometimes, but sometimes you're forcing it too. This is one where, to me, the reading actually is fairly simple. Like, actually, this is one where it's more like, the surrealistic part is it's like dream logic, isn't it? It's not supposed to make sense in like a traditional sense. They're not feeding you the plot. But if you actually consider, like, there's so many clues in this film. Like, I'll give you an example. The mystery man. If you really do think, it's being like haunted by some demon guy, right? First of all, there's so many lines that guy drops that are key. Like early on when he's saying like the line that's like, I never go where I'm uninvited or whatever. That already implies something right there. If you don't know who that person is, that seems so obviously like an externalized projection of something inside yourself.
How'd you get inside my house?
You invited me. It is not my custom to go where I'm not wanted.
Who are you?
Then there's the amazing part where it says, like, about him receiving the videotapes, and he says something like, I don't like videotapes or video cameras. I prefer to remember things the way, my own way, or something like that.
Do you want a video camera?
No.
I like to remember things my own way.
Like,
that's the key line to the whole movie.
It's the most telling line in it, because essentially you're then able to interpret. And then at the end, by the way, notice the mystery guy, the evil guy, doesn't kill him or anything. He just whispers in his ear, and then they shoot that fucking guy that they needed to do to cover the whole thing up. Like, essentially, to me, the whole premise of the film is like, it's obvious. Obviously, I'm going to speculate here, but I would say it's obvious. This is a guy who's like a fucking So he's got like a level of celebrity. He's a jazz musician, but he's clearly incredibly insecure about his wife and what's going and what other men think of her, what she
and
thinks
his
of them,
sexual
and
abilities,
and the fact that he can't perform, and that's clearly like terrorizing. Even though, by the way, she actually seems super chill, and she doesn't seem like she's cheating on him or fucking with him. She's actually one of those people where it's almost like the fact of sort of like the joke is what really actually sort of triggers her to kill him, as far as I can tell. This movie is her going, "That's okay, that's all right. You don't need to keep fucking me with that little piddly widdly dick that's sauce on." That alone is almost what makes it the A-bomb go off in this motherfucker's head.
It's okay.
And so then, if you think about it, right, he obviously does kill her and gets caught by the cops. And then when he goes to prison, right, this is where you have to you follow the dream logic, guys. Because obviously everything from that, look, there's a level of surrealism there, but we can easily just take that as he's sort of mentally cordoned off, compartmentalized part of his brain, that he's still this one character that's just a good guy, and other people are just harassing him and doing this to his wife, and why would they do this, and how could they get film inside my house? Bro, even if that was just surrealistic, you also, if you were the one who killed her, could just be filming the whole thing. But okay, there's that whole idea as well, and the idea this is like a dark force he's empowering to act out his innate desires or his like subconscious will to power or some fucked up shit. But then when he goes to prison, right? Look, that, by the way, even if you don't get the plot, that's stylish as fuck when he turns into another character, goes out, and then it goes a totally different adventure. My joke would be, David Lynch on that part was almost too subtle for these plebs. That's essentially the longest dream sequence ever filmed on camera. It just lasts for it lasts longer than the other part of the movie. But like, that's the most obvious like dream sequence ever. Because as you say, Richard, the genius of that scene and the consequent scenes is you take a thing of like, oh, but if I was this person instead and these things had happened, then at the end she'd have to die, and it's like, and it's all their fault, and I have to kill them all. In the way, I'm the good person, aren't I? And it's only at the end of all that you come back out of it like, wait a minute, I'm still the same guy. Like, that's why I feel it's actually a movie where, unironically, I actually will have pity on people who are just normies who go to the cinema. Like, the second he turns back into Fred at the end, I bet they're just like, I thought he was in prison. You're just not going to get it. It's not for you. Yeah. It's not everything's not for everyone.
I mean, there are some big ideas at play here. Like, for instance, Madonna whore complex, right?
Sure.
Sigmund Freud classic. For those, again, that have had the joy to have not read Freud, the Madonna whore complex is basically when a man can only conceive of women as either a saint, the Madonna, or a whore, the whore, right? And if you have that complex approach to women, he considered that complex, his words, not mine. Then when you're in a sexual setting, you can't perform because they either repulse you for being a whore, or they're too saintly and pure and you don't want to do it. So it creates what Freud used to call psychic impotence. And obviously, we've got quite literal impotence very early on in the scene. Bill Pullman, his character Fred, is an incredible performer. By the way, have you ever seen anyone play sax like that? That's like the Lost Boys.
Come on, the greased up guys in Lost Boys from our 80s vampire
he's even going harder than that guy. Like, strobes everywhere. Right, so obviously, that's like, he can do it on stage, he can do it with a saxophone, he can do it musically, he can't do it in bed, and that's what obviously starts to chip away at his psychology. By the way, that's an integral part of the story. Why? Because quite literally, when Pete, the character he turns into,
this is such a clue.
Has sex. He's performing. He's absolutely rocking her world. And then it zooms out and it's Bill Pullman's eyes, the eyes he had when he was impotent. And then it just goes back into the film. So obviously it's...
And by the way, later in the film, this is why if you ignore me, I can't see... You surely had to know there was something going on. It wasn't just random. Later in the film, they play the music and that sounds just like the same jazz music on the radio. And he wigs out, why would he do that if he was a totally different character? He wouldn't know anything about that fucking music, would he? Like, to me, that's the thing. I don't even feel like he's being that, like... sneaky with the clues. It's
No,
just like
no.
you can't literally come up with a Sharpie and just go, he is the fucking Fred guy. I made him literally transform in front of you. Bizarrely good. Oh, give me a break.
Well, and also,
come on.
I mean, to go back just a little bit, the idea of the dissociative fugue is that if somebody has encountered some intense psychological trauma, this is where the mind kind of erases it and makes other explanations up, which is the tie to the O.J. Simpson murder, when O.J. Simpson clearly did those murders and yet has acted for years surprisingly normal. And it's a way of the person's psychology protecting itself by like isolating that and locking it away in a box. Is it healthy? Obviously not. But it keeps people sane if they've encountered major trauma, even if they were the cause of that major trauma, as we can deduce from the fact that the horrific murder was videotaped. Yes. And we know like Fred is having, he has this kind of disgust towards his own wife, which to the point he suspects her of being with this other man because she says she doesn't want to go to the club, and then he kind of like thinks he sees her at the club that he's playing jazz at, and then you know they go to this party where she's kind of like dancing with this other guy, but not in a particularly, I would say, suggestive way of cheating. But at that point in his mind, she's cheating on him because he has other knowledge, which is that he is clearly not sexually satisfying her or himself, as we know from these sex scenes, and that kind of aggression that has been pent up is now kind of explodes on her, results in the murder. He gets immediately brought into prison because of it, and then that's when this transformation occurs, where we assume the psychogenic fugue happens, where he then he in his mind is somebody else who is let out of prison, and then he meets again Patricia Arquette, who was his wife, except slightly different, right? This blonde woman, but she is, you know, Petey, the guy who he becomes, is younger, right? He is, even the cops in this film actively talk about how much pussy he's getting. And so he is this like sexual...
It's a dream sequence already. Yeah, no, come on,
what's the line? It's something like he gets more pussy than a toilet seat. I'm like, oh God, it's such a terrible... I mean, it's funny, but it sounds like something a degenerate cop would say. It's a good line, but it is like a gross line, right?
Fucker gets more pussy than a toilet seat.
But it's memorable.
I hope she's listening. Fucking hell,
but I mean, it's these moments where he becomes, instead of impotent, this ball of sexual charisma who is gravitationally attracting all of these women, including the woman he wanted, which was his wife, right? Yeah. But then it just degenerates into her being a pornographic actress. And even though Alice, as she's called, so his wife's name was Renee, Alice is the new character in his fantasy's name, even though she is seemingly actually quite loyal to Petey and even though they commit crimes in order to try and get the funds to run away together, there's really no implication that she would leave him up until the very end when they go to the beach shack, and
she forced to do the porn at gunpoint, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I'm not going to get into it for a third episode, but come on, David, for fuck's sake. Why? every
occupation,
movie,
innit? I know. But
every movie.
I changed my perspective on it. I used to do that whole thing of like, look, they're just artists. They can do anything. It's like, mate, you're sitting down in front of a blank page or a typewriter. You can just write anything you want. It's cinema, mate. If you keep going back to certain themes, it's like, mate, you're on the list. You know what I mean? Check that fucking hard drive ASAP. Look for 100%. Polaroids in a like boot camp box underneath the bed or something. You know, give me a break, mate, like a locker, foot locker. Just search the house. Search the fucking house. Tear it apart.
It's actually crazy. I'd totally forgotten about it as well.
No,
it's like wild. I'd forgotten about it in Wild at Heart. Like my brain just deletes these things.
Even the scene where he turns to him, hands him a VHS, like, you like porno?
Yeah. Get you hard, give you a boner.
You like pornos? Pornos. Give you a boner?
No thanks.
Suit yourself, Jim.
I was like,
Which
What
also,
is
by
I
the way,
I never
I mean,
needed Robert Loggia to say
No,
that to me.
no.
By the way,
the implication,
know.
by the way, is that when he says that the porn is actually of Alice, right? Which is
Sure.
also,
Yeah.
you know, pretty interesting in terms of the scope of the film. So
Yeah.
Alice, you know, is played up as this whore, even though, again, just like Renee, her behavior in reality doesn't really seem to indicate that she's cheating, just like her behavior doesn't indicate that she is a whore who's going to leave Petey in any way. And yet, until the very end, where she just gets up and says, "You'll never have me," which is, you know, honestly, Fred, the original character,
Yeah,
Bill
of
Pullman's
course.
character's deepest fear, right? Which is why he kills her, because he is afraid of losing her, that he never had her to begin with. You can argue whichever one you want. And that's the point where he changes back into Fred, and kind of the fantasy is more or less up. You know, the jig is up at that point in time.
You'll never have me.
So I do think like there's a lot, and then obviously we found out later that Renee and Alice were the same character via the photograph, but also because we know that, you know, it was a fantasy. I know, shocking
God!
information.
But they had different names and everything, and their hair color was different. By the way, there's even an angle there that's an obvious parallel to draw to. First of all, the idea that, like, as the musician, who's this shit hot guy on stage, remember, if you don't know, by the way, one of the things a lot of men don't understand about women, where they're like, why is she with that guy who looks like that? It's like, fuck, it's not always just money, mate. It's things like people find a competence attractive. They find to be a star and to be admired by other people to be attractive. That gives you social status, etc. It's called social proofing. Well, first of all, it's a classic thing. We know this from the esports world. A classic thing about celebrity, where you're famous for one thing, but then your real life isn't that thing. That's a separate thing from you. Is you can never trust, does this person actually love me for me, or do they love me for being with that character, that person I am on stage? That's a classic thing that celebrities go through, which tortures them and makes them unable to, like, trust people, etc. And then think about what his fantasy is. Instead of her being attracted to him because he's a classic, like a fucking cool ass jazz musician, she just comes and offers herself to him as this guy who's just a fucking mechanic and all he's doing is fixing cars. And she's just like, hey, I'm into you. Like, that's the dream. She's just into you for you, mate. It has to be. You don't have money. You're just some fucking player.
And she's willing to take the risk of being killed by a gangster to do it. So it's even, you know, it's even more proof that he is just so attractive that she's willing to risk her life to do it, right?
Yeah.
One of the other things as well that Lynch does in his films, and I thought it was brilliant in this film as well, is one of the best things he does to create an ominous or an unsettling background is literally, unironically, just physiognomically, whatever, you get the point, using physiognomy to cast people in that unsettling role. So, like, in fucking Blue Velvet, it wasn't just Frank. It was the fucking Dean Stockwell character. The second you see that guy, you know he's some fucking freak and it's terrifying already. Then in this film, it's just that guy who I looked up. His name is like fucking Michael Massey. He's not even some guy I've ever seen. Just that guy with that super weird little fucking like Raul Julian mustache. That guy looks exactly like if you were someone looking across a club at a guy talking to your wife who might be wanting to fuck her. It would be that guy, wouldn't it? That's the guy you're like, shit, the guy she told you not to worry about. That's the guy. It's always some fucking guy like that. So he's able to also cast people who, by the way, are barely in the films. But when you see them already, it's like, oh, something's off about, something weird even just about what that guy looks like or what character he's supposed to play. Like, you can just intuitively, immediately sense there's something about it. You almost feel like, what is going on with her? Why is she talking to him?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say as well, the other aspect to this I like is there's like this, it brings you in. It's got like noir elements because it like brings you in to a mystery. And the mystery is who is Dick Laurent?
Dick Laurent is dead.
Who's the name at the start? It starts with a phone call. You know, Dick Laurent is dead. And,
The intercom. It's on his intercom of his house.
Yeah. Sorry, his intercom, and then he looks out the window. There's no one there, and then later on, he makes the phone call and says it.
Dick Laurent is dead.
And basically, what you find out over the course of the movie is that it's Mr. Eddie, the Robert Loggia crime character, is him, and that's like his porn producer alias or something. But it's like also in the same way Pete is an abstraction of some aspect of himself to tell a story to himself while he's getting the electric chair. That's what Mr. Eddie in the Dick Laurent paradigm is, right? Like he is Dick Laurent, but not Mr. Eddie isn't real. Like Mr. Eddie is like a character in a story that basically Fred's telling himself to justify the murder of his wife. And I think that's like kind of interesting because there's lots of famous noir movies where the reveal is the character who had a different name is a character you've already met.
Yes.
Or a character that they're looking for, most famously the third man, that they're all trying to find out who killed Harry Lime, and of course he fakes his own death and what have you. So I really like that aspect to it as well. It kind of like does give you a hook to follow the story through until the very end, and that's what I mean. It's like I actually didn't find this movie all that like confusing. It is surreal in the way it's presented. But I think if you just engage with the movie on its own terms and actually pay attention and follow it through, I do think you get a pretty rewarding payoff, right? Even if the movie does feel circular, I like that. I think that totally works for what it's trying to do. So
I don't think the movie is circular, though. I mean, it is. They try and make it circular,
kind
but
of,
to your point
it's
about Dick
bookended
Laurent,
in a way to present that.
I read a story from David Lynch that apparently the Dick Laurent is Dead was inspired by the fact that he lived next to another David and somebody like used his house as intercom and he was confused because it was a different David that the person was asking for. And in a way,
I always thought how the mundane is horrifying in David Lynch's life, by the way. It's so good.
But I think what's interesting about that is that everybody calls him Mr. Eddie and not Dick Laurent, right? And it's almost like Fred's mind is trying to piece together the random intercom call that he got at the start of the film, whether it even existed or not. And so even though why would he say that? Because Petey knew him as Mr. Eddie, right? And presumably Fred doesn't know who Mr. Eddie or Dick Laurent is, according to what we know. That's Petey's associate, right? So like it feels like his mind is trying to reach for reasons as to why his intercom would have said Dick Laurent is dead, and so invented this story for it to make sense, right?
Yeah, but also as I said, you have to understand that once we do the hard change about an hour into the movie, maybe less than 50 minutes or whatever, and we're going into Pete, everything in that world is a construction of Fred, which is the justification for the murder. So Mr. Eddie being like this outrageous, like kind of aggressive, beat a man half to death for tailgating in the funniest scene David Lynch has ever directed, maybe. Like, get a fucking manual.
I want you to get a fucking driver's manual! I want you to study that motherfucker! And I want you to obey the goddamn rules! 50,000 people were killed on the highway last year because of fucking assholes like you! Tell me you're gonna get a manual!
Yeah, I just love it. Love that shit. It's so fucking funny. When Robert Lodge is delivering the line,
that's actually
straight.
secret. I turned to my wife and I said, "That's my fantasy right there."
Yeah, just road rage is Monty's fantasy. Yeah.
No, but road justice.
Oh
Richard.
yeah, okay, I like it. That's perfectly acceptable, bro. But anyway, so like that, he creates a character of himself and then ties the Mr. Eddie identity to the Dick Laurent name. And what I'm guessing is that Dick Laurent / Mr. Eddie is someone that's had like an affair with his wife. Because remember, this is influenced by O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson didn't just kill his wife; he killed the dude that was there with her as well. And so I'm guessing at the end when he says Dick Laurent is dead, after Mr. Eddie is dead, that's how it kind of comes full circle. Like he has killed two people essentially, and while he sat there, either actually on the electric chair, dying, because that's what happens at the end when you see him quite literally in a burst of electric light and then go into the lost highway, which is obviously passing into the next life. That's what that represents. I think that's kind of what they were going for. So, I mean, there's other interpretations. Some people say the main characters represent, id, ego, and super ego. Obviously, Mr. Eddie being the super ego. Other people have said he's about to die in the electric chair, creating a narrative about, why it wasn't him who actually killed his wife. He's trying to put himself away from that. And then the mystery man represents, the pricks of consciousness.
I do buy into that for the following reasons. So, I mean, he clearly is trying to disassociate himself from the murder of his wife. And I think one of the more interesting aspects of this film is that in his fantasy as Petey, he never actually kills anybody. People die around him, but he's not the one killing them. The porn producer dies by accident. I mean, he hits him in the head, but he's not dead. And then he there's a trip. He trips and he falls into the table where he dies hilariously by getting the glass shoved into his brain. Even Mr. Eddie's death at the end, it's the mystery man who shoots him and not Petey. So even
and he's like, what do you guys want? It's not even obvious as to why he's being killed.
Yeah. So I think, it's interesting that I think his subconscious very intentionally in his fantasy makes him not the killer. He is a bystander to these things, right? Or it's an accident in the same way that the
mystery man has the same power that he has ascribed to himself, which is he can be in two places at once as two separate entities. And so the parallel with him and the mystery man is like when that great scene where he gives him the phone and he goes, "I'm at your house."
One of the most memorable Lynch ones ever. Yeah, really creepy.
What do you mean you're where right now?
At your house.
That's fucking crazy, man.
That's fucking insane. And then he's talking to him there in his house while he stood next to him. And so obviously that's another reason why I think the mystery man is a psychological aspect of Fred's. So yeah, exactly, because he's doing exactly what the mystery man does. It's the mystery man that kills Mr. Eddie at the end, right?
I think the mystery man, though, represents, he's the one who's kind of bringing Fred back around to the uncomfortable truth every time. Right.
Yes.
He's the one. So in the initial scene at the party, when he's saying, "Call me, I'm in your house," that's a fantasy because he is in his house because he's a part of Fred's mind that's trying to show him the truth. The line that Duncan referred to earlier,
Fred doesn't want to be in the house, which is why he's watching it on the videos, because that mechanism represents it's not a real memory. It's something that happened and I wasn't there and I'm watching it, but obviously they are real memories.
And the real key is what Duncan pointed out earlier, where when he's asked if he has a video camera, he says, "I like to remember things my own way." He doesn't actually want to see the truth, right? He has no interest in seeing things literally how they happened, but we know he does own the video camera because obviously it was him like taking these video camera shots. And then at the end, the mystery man in the shack has the video camera trained on him in a very creepy way, right? And this is where he is showing him that there is a record, like a physical record of the acts that he's committed.
And your name? What the fuck is your name?
So the mystery man is intimidating, but that's because he is intimidating to the fantasy that Fred has created. He is the truth in a way. He's the one who's actually exposing what is going on and is the one trying to break Fred out of the dissociative fugue.
We've met before, haven't we?
I don't think so. Where is it you think we've met?
At your house. Don't you remember?
Yeah, I agree. It represents, I guess, I've never been in a fugue state. I've done a lot of ketamine, and that puts you in a dissociative state. This is getting weird now, but it's worth talking about.
No, I like it. I like what's good.
No, because obviously with that being, so how it was always explained to me how like ketamine works is because it's anesthesia essentially. What it does is it's like packet loss for the brain. And so it's like info, blank, 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 info. And in the blanks, your brain goes, wait, there's blanks here. I have to fucking fill this in with something that makes coherent sense. Otherwise, you can't make sense of the world. And what your brain puts in there might not make sense in reality, but it'll make sense within your brain. It's coming from within. And so this is why you'll have like hallucinations, and ketamine affects everyone differently. Some people see like, colors are really vivid. Some people really, fucking have visuals. Some people it's like, audio is really like profound and different and stuff. I've always been a visual guy, so it affects me that way. But it's like, for instance, I went to like a beach party one time. It was at a place called the Custard Factory. I think it's been shut down in Birmingham now. It's like this legendary nightclub, and the bouncers would never pull you up for like ketamine or Molly. They would only do it for like coke or heroin or whatever. You know what I mean? They only stopped hard drugs going into the nightclub, hard drugs. And so we used to do a lot of ketamine in there. And I was at this beach party, and there was all these like palm trees. And I'd had some fairly big bumps, right? And so every time I was looking up at the sky, for me, it was like I was in Platoon or something. I was seeing like helicopters, like Vietnamese helicopter. I don't know why I'm in Vietnam, but my brain associated the palm trees with being in the Vietnamese jungle for some reason. And so I know I'm kind of aware that they're not there, but my brain has told me you need to see some helicopters right now. And so when you're the interesting psychological part with dissociative state, I guess, is there is an aspect of you that tries to like come back in, like to bring you back to reality. Like you can't stay there. We call that the K-hole. It's not a great place a lot of the time. Although some people really like it. Go figure. But I agree. I see the mystery man as that voice from within. You're in a fugue state. This isn't right. This isn't real. Come back to reality now, and obviously if the reality is horrifying and unpleasant, you don't want to go. And I think that interplay between those two characters, because ultimately the mystery man is presented as something horrifying, but in many ways I think that's kind of that in itself is a representation of Fred recoiling from the horror of the reality of his deeds and indeed his impending death on death row. So
by the way, if there's no more on that aspect, one thing I would like to say is, to be fair, they won't possibly have made it this far in the episode. Also, these are also films you don't watch the fucking episode before you watch the film. But the sad thing is, the reason I think it's so pathetic this film bombed and wasn't, like I say, his crowning jewel that made him go to like the next level and get unlimited funding and status where you're always going to have a film and everyone's always going to be in it, is you don't even need to appreciate any of that shit to enjoy this film. Like, first of all, what's the most basic part of cinema? Sound and visuals. So the sound is fucking unbelievable, because what he did basically is he brought and commissioned Trent Reznor, who at the time was at his absolute peak of superstardom. And obviously everyone knows he'd already produced like the Marilyn Manson stuff, and he brought him up, etc. And he basically gets him and tells him sort of like, this actually, if you think about it, when he's done all the later stuff with Atticus Ross, where he's actually scored soundtracks, instead this is one where he's just going and he's getting either a mixture of David Lynch has got his own music there, like some old school stuff and some old 60s stuff that he always works in, etc. But then he's commissioning, I'd said this on the past episode, he commissions actually like original art from Marilyn Manson, the Smashing Pumpkins, 9 Inch Nails themselves. One of the most famous 9 Inch Nails song is the song The Perfect Drug. That was for this film. That wasn't just like it's on an album and then he gave you that. These are, and by the way, these are like, if you like those artists, these are up there with like their best work, like the fucking banger tracks. Then you've even got stuff like, so when you get to the Rammstein at the end, etc., which is also fabulously used, by the way. So good.
Renee?
Rammstein's first album that's off had only come out like 1.5 years before. That's not when it's like 10 years later and everyone knows Du Hast and all that shit. It's sort of like a cult classic. Actually, like Trent Reznor was fucking tuned into, like, at the time, what was all the metal and industrial music, and he obviously had the Rolodex to get all these bits. So first of all, the soundtrack is unbelievable. I actually think, aside from ones where you get amazing orchestral guy to score a soundtrack, this is one of the best soundtracks of real musicians I think I've ever heard. In fact, one of the things about this film is I haven't rewatched it in many, many years, but this is one of the ones where I had the soundtrack for fucking years, and I was always listening to this one. It's a banger. And then that ties into the visual, mate. The visual feast in this film is unbelievable. I'll run you through some of the stylish scenes. The opening sequence is fucking fire when he's going on the highway. The saxophone sequence with the flickering lights, it's instantly memorable once you've seen it. The transformation itself into the other character in the cell. The next car chase, the one with the Mr. Eddie guy where they're going super fast, it's sort of like an up-tempo sort of hi-hat type snare thing in the background. By the way, even when he initially meets Patricia Arquette, that's like something out of a fucking dream sequence itself, the way she like slowly getting out the car and walking towards you all, etc. Like, the fucking look of this film is chef's kiss, one of the best of David Lynch.
This magic moment, so different and so new, was like any other, until I met you.
Yeah, absolutely. On the soundtrack as well, what you have to remember is, you know, if I say to you, oh, he got Trent Reznor, he basically did a collaboration with Trent Reznor to create a soundtrack, and Angelo Badalamenti, who was obviously David Lynch's long-term collaborator, sadly deceased now, to do the score, you would go, yeah, but you know, that makes sense, right? Those guys are legends in their field. Trent Reznor had only done one movie soundtrack before this, and it was Natural Born Killers, which was very considered hit and miss at the time. But I also think it was a quintessential step in the right direction for 90s soundtracks. There's a lot of 90s movies that are very interesting in terms of the original music that was recorded for the films. There was a lot of, like, I think about The Crow, where the premise for The Crow, another great movie from the 90s, the premise of The Crow was they got metal bands to like record covers of other famous songs to create this like gothic kind of, you know, moody sound architecture, and very often in The Crow there's always a lot of scenes, there's music in the background from the soundtrack. And obviously on that soundtrack, Nine Inch Nails record Joy Division's Dead Souls, which is about being haunted by the past of colonialism, because Joy Division are just fucking insane. Anyway, so you then fast forward to like other stuff like Judgment Night, and how they brought together metal bands and hip hop bands, and they would do collaborations, which leads to like ridiculous things like Faith No More and Booyah Tribe doing Another Body Murdered. And there was this like movement. And then in the middle of the 90s, you know, 94, 95, whenever Natural Born Killers comes out, Trent Reznor does that soundtrack, and then suddenly it's like, oh wait, it's not just something you do so you can release a single with the movie. It's something you do so it adds to the textual experience of the movie. And Trent Reznor was one of the first guys, because as Duncan said, I mean, after the Downward Spiral, this guy's considered like a musical savant. He's took industrial and elevated it to a whole new level, you know, because before that it was a bit rough around the edges with, you know, Ministry and Skinny Puppy and bands like that. He elevates it to this new level. He enters into rock superstardom and is given carte blanche. And the Natural Born Killers soundtrack is like very fondly regarded by a lot of people in the 90s. And what it did is it essentially paved the way for Lost Highway, which is an evolution of the form, which is you can embed diegetically these songs created by contemporary artists into a movie, but it gives it a timeless feel, because it's not that hip single you heard on the radio. It's a song that was recorded specifically for the film.
And
so,
also,
yeah.
I think it changes the mold of a lot of other early 90s and late 80s films where they were vehicles for pop stars to have hit singles, often over the credits of a film.
Think that it's nothing new. Think about Casablanca. Right?
Yeah.
That we've also covered.
As time goes by.
As time goes by.
Or Breakfast at Tiffany's with Moon River.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that's what makes this a really interesting soundtrack. I mean, by the way, the stuff by Angelo Badalamenti, he leans into very heavily the avant-garde jazz motif that it relates to the main character Fred, and there's some pretty fucking complex pieces of music on this soundtrack recorded by him. The Rammstein stuff at the end is just brilliantly used. I agree. I think that's just fucking fantastic. Marilyn Manson, he has a song called Apple of Sodom on it. Like, I'm not a massive Marilyn Manson fan.
I mean, the cover he does of I Put a Spell on You is really good in this, though.
Yes, yeah. His I Put a Spell on You is brilliant as well.
And he's in the movie, too. He's in the
movie. Yeah, he's in the porno with Twiggy Ramirez, yeah. But I again, like, to take contemporary artists. Oh, and fucking Lou Reed. His cover
and
of
David
This Magic
Bowie.
Moment is fucking great. David Bowie, all-timer. So, I mean, like, this soundtrack... By the way, if you don't like the movie, definitely get a copy of the soundtrack. Yeah, it's fucking... And in many ways, by the way, the soundtrack is so good, it's really evocative of what the film's about in a lot of ways, actually. You can, like, listen to the whole thing, and it does take you to a place. So this is it's a masterpiece of musical soundtracks. And it went gold. It went gold in the US.
Yeah. But I think it's important to distinguish this film, like I said, from the way that soundtracks were used. I mean, if you think about it, they were used as vehicles in order to springboard those songs on the charts, on the Billboard charts, right?
Yeah.
And that has not been, I think, the main trend over the last 20 years or so. What's the last one that like reached number one from a film? Probably We Don't Talk About Bruno by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Pretty sure that was the most recent one that had like a major
years money.
Yeah.
But but I don't think that song was intended to like be a major success, but artists would literally all the biggest artists of the time would literally record songs, with the intent of these movies of actually using them as that springboard.
This one is obviously like James Bond theme. That's a classic one. If you just want a number one in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even Chris Cornell did a Bond theme. So I mean, but I was going to say Prince with the Batman movie. That was like an integral part of the Batman experience. You know.
And by the way, even though those movies were gash, Bat Dance is a fucking classic. Look it up.
Yeah. No, but not only that, mate. That one where Jack Nicholson destroys the fucking party man. That is fire. That is like actually that's up there with anything Prince recorded for me. Party man is a fucking banger. I don't give a fuck. Die on that hill all day.
Yeah, this just my point is this soundtrack just feels like a much more natural and deliberate approach than having some sort of wacky pop ballad at the end of a Three Musketeers movie as they did in 1993. But this is really, as Thorin mentioned, integral, where Nine Inch Nails was making music specifically for this film that feels part of this film and yet became famous in its own right because it was good, not because it was some sort of weirdly associated marketing technique. But it really feels like a music video at times. I mean, the amount of music they use. One thing that struck me was even the volume of the music seemed perfect.
Oh,
where like the sound mixing is so good that the music is very forward and it's very loud in context of the movie, but it feels so deliberate and beautifully designed that you're just like, oh man, I'm really into this 20 seconds of this movie while Rammstein is playing. This is awesome.
Did you want to talk to me? Huh? Did you want to ask me why?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think all of that stuff is really well done, and I think ultimately it's kind of interesting. Like, the movie attained like a cult status when I was growing up. I don't know if Duncan experienced the same thing. It was almost like there was this new wave of movies that were happening in the 90s, where if you were like turned on to good films, there were films that you watched, and a lot of them were Tarantino emulators. A lot of them were Killing Zoe, is an example. One of my personal favorites is Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead with Christopher Walken.
Even, by the way, Natural Born Killers would be in the same vein.
Natural Born
No,
Killers,
you mean, by the
correct.
way, if you think as a kid, right, one of the things that we used to get in the UK that was weird was they had a lot of these things that were like movie clubs where you join them and you pay a monthly fee and they send you you pick like 3 movies or something once you and they keep sending you them. And it's the same as the music club concept where the idea is the reason it's a mega business model is one, it's insanely hard to cancel, and two, you set it and forget it, don't you? So once you sign up to it, you're just going to buy way more movies than you normally would. And what they would do is in a magazine, they'd put like a little advert for this that would be like a slick thing of like movies you could pick. And what Richard's saying here is the top line would be like Pulp Fiction, fucking like he says, like Natural Born Killers, and this would be one of them, by the way. Like Lost Highway would have been in that mix because actually you didn't even have to know about David Lynch. It wasn't the idea he was some aficionado of cinephile. This was just considered like a stylish, edgy film. I'm with you, mate.
Yeah, it was. It was like, and obviously the soundtrack. Just speaking from my own experience as a teenager, the soundtrack was a big part of that. The soundtrack was definitely baked into whatever passed.
Well, it's very contemporary, right? I think it's impressive that David Lynch was cool enough to know about this alternative industrial music in the mid 90s.
I think he descended to a point where, and this happens to a lot of like genre defining artists. Obviously, I'm a huge William Burroughs fan. It happened to him. You get to a stage where people just come to you. They just want to work with you. They know you're good. You're iconic. You're going to go down in the annals of legend. And so they come. So listen, I don't think David Lynch has ever been contemporary. I think the 50s happened and David Lynch's brain stayed there forever. And you know, he just updated experientially how he would process the ideal, you know, Lynchian 50s. And I think that's why he's always off kilter. I think David Lynch is literally a man out of time. But he's always been so open-minded that he essentially has this immutable core, which is, as we've talked about in previous episodes, the true, genuine fondness for Americana, but also someone who won't shy away from the darker aspects of the forces around the pure core at the heart of the American dream, you know, for David Lynch. And so I think probably what was happening at this point in his career in the 90s, the 90s for me was the last great decade for film. I mean, A24 is doing what it can now with some interesting movie choices. And I definitely think horror's had a renaissance in the last 10 years. But I think in general, if you want to see like real art that is presented with an almost auteur-esque approach and without studio interference, and it is just the true vision of the artist put on the screen, these movies kind of ended in the 90s, and it was basically Tarantino and Lynch and directors like that really kicked off the last great wave of cinema. And so I genuinely believe he was probably approached. I mean, again, for context, William Burroughs, he had a nightclub, like a bar type thing called The Bunker. And it was an underground fire hazard with no windows, permanent darkness, and UV lighting. And basically, Burroughs would, even in his 60s, 70s, you know, an old man, he died at like 90, he was 92, I think, when he died or something. He was very old anyway. And he would just sit there all day. And one of his biographers would essentially be the connect to introduce him to all these artists. And he tells some incredible anecdotes if you go and seek them out, like meeting Lou Reed. Lou Reed was just fawning all over Burroughs and like really wanted Burroughs to like him, and he just found Lou Reed a fucking bore. He just had no time for him whatsoever, because that's the level of bullshit Burroughs was on. He just wasn't in like fucking. He was more interested in meeting like Sonic Youth, doing collaborations with Kurt Cobain. You know, like Lou Reed, fuck you. You know, so what? We've both done heroin. Cool. You know what I mean? And so, obviously, when you're a legend like David Lynch, he's probably sat at a typewriter, chain smoking and drinking coffee, or in like his favorite diner, and he gets like a phone call. You know, you want to meet Marilyn Manson? He says he really likes you. You know, and it's like, I don't know about that. Tell me about this Marilyn Manson? Is he a boy or a girl? You know. And that's probably what went down, you know, and it's like I love that.
My favorite version of that, because it's so fucking off tone, it makes no sense at all. A lot of people will have missed this one. Is about something like 4 or 5 years ago, Kanye West just did that to Alejandro Jodorowsky, and you could tell Jodorowsky has no fucking clue who he is.
What is this fever dream?
And because it's Kanye, there's a video of this. Don't worry, he's talking to Jodorowsky as if sort of like, you know, you get all my shit, of course, you know, me and you are sort of the same thing. And Jodorowsky's just sort of going like, Kanye is the guy where he is doing the music, yes. It's like, mate, this is so, like, you couldn't get a more ridiculous juxtaposition of the idea that, like, the guy who was mental. Like, think about Kanye, especially back in the day, we had those, like, glasses and he used all the vocal. It's like, there's no way. Like that, but that's exactly what you're saying, Richard. These people who themselves are contemporary artists want to be like, I need to connect myself to someone I think's cool, though, and show, like, oh, we're kindred spirits, we're this. It's a real phenomenon.
Yeah, Andy Warhol had the same thing. You know, quite famously, he was around a lot of music at the time, Velvet Underground and The Doors and stuff like that. Everybody wanted a piece of him at the time, which is famously, you know, the whole 15 minutes of fame concept comes from. He was very aware of, like, the ephemeral nature of celebrity. So yeah, that's probably what went down. I mean, I don't think like David Lynch was like bumping fucking Rammstein albums. Like that's gonna really fit. In fact, one of the things I'll say is actually because we saw it in Wild at Heart, where what was the name of the band in that that has that the thrash metal theme that they're always dancing to?
the power metal, the
I can't remember the name of the band now.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Anyway, like. One of the things that I've always found about David Lynch movies is very often how the music kind of doesn't fit. The score fits, like because he's always working with Angelo Badalamenti, and he's like an expert, you know, composer. But the diegetic music, the music that he wants, you know, the music he brings in, like just also like the candy-colored clown. What the fuck is actually what's happening there, mate? Like, it is wild how he uses these songs, but obviously it is how incongruous they are, how like out of place they are. That's what makes it effective. In this, I think every time you hear a song, come on, you go, yeah, this is a banger. Like it fits the scene. It works. I can listen to this. Oh, I must put that soundtrack on again. Probably going to listen to it after the show, actually. But so yeah, I think probably this is some of his best work in terms of the music. So definitely.
Also, I mean, I think it did a good job of probably attracting people like us who were young people when this movie came out, and you know, it was really tapped into contemporary youth culture, I would say, and it's still cool. As we said, it's still the movie is still stunningly beautiful, super stylish. You know, it's awesome to look at the entire time. It's beautifully framed, beautifully shot, and it's just like oozes cool with the music, right? It just nails every aesthetic aspect. It's great.
It's also got elements of what for many people is considered the greatest short story ever written by a US author. That's what Kurt Vonnegut says. I'm more inclined. I still believe it's Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, but the short story An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which might be one of the most influential short stories ever written in anywhere in the world. It's essentially about someone that's being hung during the American Civil War, and he gets away, and he's like, you know, it's a really convoluted escape. Like the rope snaps as he's being hung. He gets in the river. He's like swimming away. They made it into a Twilight Zone episode, by the way. So if people want to check that out, it's really good. It's definitely in terms of just overall quality, because it wasn't made by...
forwards now, because Richard's going to tell you the spoiler. So if you do want to watch that episode, pause now, quickly go and watch it, come back.
Yeah. So anyway, he escapes. He's come to the water. He's doing all this stuff, you know, and beautiful riding away with the sun on his face, and then all of a sudden it turns out it was all just a fantasy, and he was actually that he had as he was being waiting to be hung in this like stretched out moment of time, and then he's just dead. And so that short story has been done a million times. You know, there was even like a Brian Cox movie called The Escapist. Same thing. You know, it's just a genre staple. It's because it's like a really cool twist on, it was all a dream. It was all a dream, and then I fucking die at the end, so now it's sad. So anyway, that's obviously kind of what's going on here as well. Like, I mean, he, like I say, the literal burst of energy at the end, speeding off into the Lost Highway. You know, that's obviously how David Lynch conceptualizes death. So that's like a nice little additional feature to it, and I have no doubt that was an influence for sure. Because I mean, that to me, as I said, I think that's just what's going on.
Well,
I'd be very
I mean,
surprised.
he makes it pretty obvious with the blinking, all the flashing lights and the spasming of Fred in the car. Like and we know he's supposed to be executed by electric chair. I mean, come on.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it could have, by the way, all that Madonna horse stuff as well. Thinking about it now that the main character is Fred, which is only one letter away from Freud. Probably pretty obvious.
Oh, by the way, speaking of that, though, there's another thing is what great casting of Patricia Arquette. Like, I've seen her in films before where she was just whatever. In this one, she plays both the roles quite well. One, she is the sort of coquettish, you know, a little bit like, a little bit precocious, but very innocent with the blonde hair and all that. By the way, you think about her performance in that sense, she's all pressured into doing the porn stuff, but then at the end, she's this evil bitch all along, oh my God, what the fuck? But then you think about what she is earlier as his wife. By the way, when she has like the dark hair and that like lipstick color and the fingernail, she looks positively gothic. And actually that one shot, when you early on see her like nude profile from the side, and we'll talk on the last episode about Wild at Heart, about like unnecessary nudity, that's just actually like fucking art, mate. That looks fun. You could like frame that and make that like an image. That could be an image of the era of the Marilyn Mansons and the Nine Inch Nails, where they were leaning into this like industrial gothic aspect of art.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, just to say a little bit about her, like she did so many like sleeper movies that people like don't really. It's like she's almost like she's so good you just kind of forget that she's actually a person outside of the films, and like she does multiple films. It's like every film she's in, you kind of are just like, you know, like invested. Like obviously, True Romance. Everybody loved her in True Romance. If you didn't have a crush on her in True Romance, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have a pulse. Like, she was just fucking absolutely stellar in that. But she's also in, Ed Wood. She's in, obviously, this. She was in Bringing Out the Dead as well, which is another slept-on movie. Obviously, you fast forward to when she's an older actress, and she's in Boardwalk Empire. She does a whole season of that. And she's great. Her and Steve
Monty's favorite show, Severance.
Oh,
she's in it now. She's still in Severance.
Yeah. She's still in Severance. Got to be honest. I'll just say this again. If I haven't said this already to you guys, Severance didn't need a second season. It needed a 10th
Oh my
episode.
God, it's still good. Whatever. Anyway,
it's so far away from its
so
central conceit. Yeah, that's not. We'll do that. But we should do a special version of Nerd Legion when the second season finishes, Monty. I'll come on for Nerd Legion.
Okay.
And explain to you why
fight
the
us.
second season has gone up its own arse, but the first season was genius. So, but anyway, I really, really like her. She her movie debut will always be dear to my heart because it was Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, which is probably one of the best Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
Also fitting for this film.
Correct. Excellent.
Also, I mean,
connection.
she was also in Boyhood, which I mean,
We never
took
talked
what?
about that.
Okay. I
But
mean,
it
it's
was
impressive
filmed-
that she dedicated 12 years or whatever to
It was filmed
filming
over
that
12
project.
years, Monty. It was filmed over 12 years. It's a cinematic achievement filmed. It's total garbage, though, of course. It's like really boring.
Richard
total garbage.
Linklater, but that was one where it's like,
Yeah.
It's
one of those where
talking?
the idea is so like, oh wow,
It
yeah,
could have been the most genius piece of cinema
exactly.
ever. Yeah, of course. Imagine if like some like Terrence Malick fucker had done that. You'd be like, oh, this is genius. Oh, what was he thinking? But like, you didn't land it, mate. You didn't.
No,
land
you
it.
definitely didn't land it, unfortunately. And look, I love Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke's another slept-on motherfucker for me. Like, I actually think he's great, but not even he can save Boyhood, bro. Like, that's just pretentious wank. But anyway, yeah, she's really, really good in this, and it is interesting watching her kind of career evolution, because she went from being like the young, the kind of young upstart, you know, that you would have like a crush on, a rebellious girl, but also kind of a bit vulnerable, needs saving, and then over time you kind of watch her like, you know, she gets hard, she gets tough, you know, she can take care of herself. She's probably in the between phase now in Lost Highway, but obviously now she plays like really, you know, a lot of the characters she gets kind of typecast into. She's playing, you know, tough women. So yeah, she's just great. I mean,
she's
really,
actually
really
the
like
main
her.
character of this, because the
Well, she
other
did it
main
twice
character
as
is
well.
split between two actors.
Yeah.
So she's the consistent heart of this movie.
Yeah, which probably says something. I mean, I think David Lynch. Well, one thing we can definitely say by this point, the third movie, while it's complicated, he definitely puts women on a pedestal. He definitely idolizes women. All of his movies seem to be centered around beautiful women, right? Like that's fine. It's just very often
and Twin Peaks, which is just like stuffed with beautiful women.
Yes, but also, and sometimes those beautiful women also play multiple roles,
or Asian men, depending.
Yeah, yes. But I'll also add, and I'll always say this: it's a great misconception about Twin Peaks that it's about the death of Laura Palmer, because it's actually about her life. And I that's what I love. That's what I love about it. That it's actually like you get all these little secrets revealed about Laura Palmer, and sometimes it's like she was a really kindly soul and she did this good thing, but then it was like, oh, but she had her demons, and it's like the reveals. They very rarely get you closer to the killer, but they do get you closer to a full, fleshed out, 3-dimensional understanding of who Laura Palmer was and why she might have been in a bad situation. You know, and that's what I mean. I think like it's why probably my brain has never registered how fucked up this recurring woman being held in sexual / rape bondage nightmare, like just a scene in every film.
Like in every film at this point, isn't it?
Yeah. No, but like it literally is, and it's like I've probably just like never registered that, because I think generally speaking, you take those scenes out, it's very clear that often the female characters in David Lynch's movies, the women are the heart of the movie. They're the soul of the movie. Whether it's a complicated damsel in distress like Blue Velvet, or a moral center like Wild at Heart, you know, it's and here, as you say, Patricia Arquette's character, she's the main character. She's the object of everyone's desire, and sadly, as it's implied, dead. So, but yeah, she's great. She's great in this movie. I mean, everyone's good. There's not a bad performance in the film.
Shall we discuss
I feel Roger
Mr. Ebert? Because
right, well,
I think it's,
as we alluded to, he gave this 2 stars. So right
I do think that it's interesting how consistent he was in his David Lynch is a great director, but doesn't make sense to me criticism that has now, by the way, by the time of this release, remember we started with Blue Velvet, it has now been over a decade of him watching David Lynch, and he still hasn't fucking figured out a single thing.
It's one of the things I fucking detest about Roger Ebert now, because one thing I've noticed is this guy, right? Oh, he loves to show everyone how he's got his finger on the pulse of like cinema. He's always at like Cannes and Sundance and watching independent film and reviewing them. But it's actually clear now, having referenced Roger Ebert for over 50 episodes of Foreplay, he actually never got that. He's not like
an army, bro. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
It's like actually his understanding. He might know how to express like in the written word what he's seeing on the screen. He might be able to use, very highfalutin cinematic terms, like oeuvre and mise en scène and all of this shit. Right, like any media student can churn out. But when it comes down to the actual core of just detaching yourself, watching a piece of art, and then coming up with your own opinion about it, it's so insane how conventional he is.
What I don't understand about him is how a man who watches art professionally cannot understand any level of abstraction at all. If it gets abstract even a tiny bit, he completely does not understand the plot of the movie.
The joke is, the one time he ever did dip his toe into that pool was when he goes Casablanca. A lot of gay shit behind the scenes and all that stuff, wasn't there? Like, what? And I feel like after that, he just rooped through me. Like, you know what? I'm never doing that again. It's like, that's because I still don't even know what he was reading into that. I still can't get that part myself.
It's like, what about that gay subtext in Casablanca? What are you talking about, man? Look, you can say that about a million movies. This one?
Listen, kids, you got to get on that plane, because me and Laszlo are gonna fucking wreck each other with
this is the start of a beautiful anal friendship. What are you talking about, you fucking lunatic? What are you talking about?
I'll still never understand like what he was on with that. And by the way, there's probably a book out there I could read that will probably make it more
he
apparent.
simultaneously says that and then explains it's the greatest film ever. What are you saying, my dude? What is your baggage?
Come here, Mrs. Ebert. I'm fucking hell. Blow up.
So he spends this entire review being confused about the story because it doesn't make sense to him, including lines such as, "Is this the same person as the murdered wife? Was the wife really murdered? Hello?"
He's actually saying it out loud. He's actually saying what I joked a normie would say. Like, I'm doing my Reddit voice for fucking. He's actually saying that in his review.
Yeah.
Why did you do a hair color shit? Like, bro, you get paid for this shit. This is insane.
Including this. Does any scene in the movie have a point? Lost Highway plays like a director's idea book in which isolated scenes and notions are jotted down for possible future use. Instead of massaging them into a finished screenplay, Lynch and collaborator Barry Gifford seem to have filmed the notes. What are you talking about, dude?
Yeah, but the next line there is the joke on us? Is it our error to try to make sense of the film, to try to figure out why protagonists change in midstream? Let's say it is. Let's say the movie should be taken exactly as is with no questions asked. Then what do we have? We still have just the notes for isolated scene. This is the bonkers bit. There's no emotional or artistic thread running through the material to make it seem necessary it's all in the same film together. There's no emotional or artistic thread in this film. Are you Roger, are you sure? Do you want to commit that to writing for generations to read after you're fucking dead? Is that your... Do you really want to do that, Roger?
I think we're the only ones reading his reviews.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're the only ones doing like a posthumous hate campaign against his entire reputation.
No, there must be others.
There must be others. Shout out to David Lynch, because remember, we talked about this in his previous films where at Cannes, at Wild at Heart, Roger Ebert was literally booing him as he won the Palme d'Or. Remember, okay? So
go on.
When David Lynch, so Siskel and Ebert gave the film 2 thumbs down, and David Lynch's response was 2 more great reasons to see Lost Highway.
Okay.
So he was throwing it back out. By this point, like the rivalry between Lynch and Ebert was really on by this stage.
The problem is, this guy just is an NPC, man. Like, he's not a real person. And then also, like, he is so incapable of any subtextual reading that, like, David Lynch could have made a film where there was a scene where a character called David just fucks a character called Roger Ebert up the ass as he, like, scribbles shit notes. And he'd have gone, but what was he saying, though? And why was I in it? You know, like, you'd never get it, mate. You'd never register with this guy. I agree with you, Monty. In some ways, like, this guy is actually like the nemesis of fucking Roger Ebert, isn't he? Of David Lynch. Like, he's just the shitter critic, like that guy from the fucking Fountainhead who's always like writing the terrible things against. Oh, it's fucking nuts, this guy.
I know. I'll say this: the one good thing that this podcast has contributed to the world is every single time in the comments I see, what about the werewolf break? So we've really installed, right, the beast must die as if it was some forgotten piece of art.
Something with
exactly. Like, the Citizen Kane of horror movies. Like, I love that. And also as well, fuck Roger Ebert is just constantly a thing now. Like, we are gonna change the world. We're gonna put it this way: come the revolution, you might have things you want to do. I will burn all of Roger Ebert's books. He will be burned from the annals of cinematic history.
Is you have to remember, in Britain, we weren't getting Roger Ebert in his reviews. We just
Barry
knew about
Norman
him culturally. Yeah. So what's funny is I actually assumed, Monty, that this guy was just every sort of wanky film guy.
Yeah.
And that his whole shit would be like every Palme d'Or film's the best, and you had to see it in Cannes. And when I saw the early screening of the thing, like, I would have thought this guy would be all over every little fucking Truffaut film, and like he's actually hyper me. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it.
I think he did rate Synecdoche, New York as the best film of the 2000s, which is weird.
Wait a minute. He likes that film.
I know,
but then he's
right?
watching this going, what's going on? I can't even interpret it. It's like notes
it's
and
mysterious,
scenes.
right?
What are you
it actually
talking about?
blows your mind. By the way, as a spoiler for our next one, he did rate Mulholland Drive 4 stars, and his opening line of the review is, David Lynch has been working toward Mulholland Drive all of his career, and now that he's arrived there, I forgive him Wild at Heart and even Lost Highway.
Here's the sad thing. I already know what's going to happen. It's going to make me so upset. It's going to just be like True Detective and The Wire. There's going to be people who go, brilliant. And then you ask them why, and you go, you didn't even like it for the right reasons. I hate you even more now. Even though you actually like the thing I like, I hate that you like it for the wrong reasons.
Correct.
But Game of Thrones only got bad on the last season. I hate you with every fiber of my being.
It just feels like Roger Ebert spends like a decade trying to be the naysayer to this guy, but everybody loves him. So eventually he just had to switch sides, right? That's what it feels like to me. Because there's nothing different about Mulholland Drive than these movies.
He's also done that thing which I hate, which is like, you're just some shitter from the peanut gallery, like, boo, it's not good, change the performance. Then finally you do a film. By the way, no connection to what you're saying or your feedback. Then finally you make a film, the guy vibes with, and you go, thank you. That's what I was asking you to do all along. You've learned your lesson. Fuck you. He wasn't doing it for you. He wasn't taking notes from you and changing his films, was he? Like, yeah, you just never vibed with any of them, you idiot. Come on.
By the way, he remember, we just read his review of Lost Highway, and keep this in mind for Mulholland Drive. He literally just spent Lost Highway telling us how it doesn't have a plot, right? One of the sentences in his review of Mulholland Drive is, it tells the story of, well, there's no way to finish that sentence. My God.
Listen, I'm gonna just tell you this.
Roger Ebert, I just need you to have some consistent parameters for how you review things.
And praising Mulholland Drive is so just embarrassingly transparent, because if you were around at the turn of the century and you remembered how Mulholland Drive was being like, again, it was being, because it was a weird time, because it was like it came out, I think it was just released internationally, like, was it yeah, it was just after 9/11. It was just after 9/11, I'm pretty sure. And
it was in 2001. I don't know if it was at the end of the year or not.
Yeah, I think it was. And I think it, like, obviously it debuted in Cannes in the summer, and then since then it was like 9/11.
Yeah, you're right.
And
it was May, and it was May 2001 at Cannes, and then October 12th. So like actually a month after 9/11 in the US.
But everybody just had no hate left in their heart. Like,
you're telling me it took Osama bin Laden to actually get Roger Ebert shit together on David Lynch?
Thorin, all I'm going to say is Osama bin Laden caused Chicago to win Best Picture. That's all I'm going to say.
That's the thing I was going to say. It was like that. Look, it was a time when everyone loved every movie that was released. Chicago won like 30.
I hate him and the things he did and the effect he had on this world.
Osama bin Laden caused Chicago, guys. I'm just going to say.
Yeah. So, like, literally everyone was just like, can we all just be friends? Can we all just learn to love again? And Roger Ebert's there 4 stars, David. I'm so sorry. Like, that's almost certainly what went down. It was like an olive branch right at the end. And the fact is, it's David Lynch's penultimate movie. It took the entirety of David Lynch's career for Roger Ebert to get on board, essentially. So no forgiveness, no quarter, Roger Ebert. I'm coming for you in the afterlife, like the original script of Gladiator. You're Gladiator 2. You're in big trouble. Just so ridiculous. But I mean, look, obviously we've done the Roger Ebert segment, so we're getting close to the end. So I mean, for me, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I didn't know where I was going to rate this on this arc. I will always have a soft spot for Blue Velvet. I studied that at university. It was one of the movies that was like the first step towards becoming a pretentious film wanker, and therefore I have a lot of love for it. Lost Highway is definitely a better film than Wild at Heart, I think. Wild at Heart might be more fun. It might have some more broadly comedic beats, although I still think the Robert Loggia scene, beating a man to death on the side of the road for tailgating in a car that's hilariously fast because he uses sped up footage, no doubt purposefully. I think that might be the funniest scene he ever recorded. Maybe Mulholland Drive with the hitman scene where people keep coming along, so he has to kill them, and the bodies are piling up. But like, David Lynch had a good sense of comedy and horror. This movie is very closer to horror sensibilities, so I think that's probably why I vibe with this one more than Wild at Heart, which I think is closer to a comedy. And so for me, this is a top 2 David Lynch movie. Now, obviously, I've got the Mulholland Drive rewatch around the corner, and everything Duncan has said about Mulholland Drive is making me very nervous because I loved Mulholland Drive.
Maybe I'll like it more when I rewatch it.
Yeah, I love
for me, I told you.
So
this is the crest of the wave for me after this goes down a bit.
So
I was following it up.
I find myself maybe agreeing with Thorin as well, because I think I've seen Mulholland Drive more recently than you guys have, because I've seen it in the past couple of years, and I liked it, but I had forgotten, because I hadn't seen Lost Highway in a long time, how good this one was. So
what you think Lost Highway is a better distillation of the points?
So I think, to compare it to Wild at Heart, I think Wild at Heart had some things that felt extraneous, like the Wizard of Oz stuff that, I didn't really jive with. But this one is much more, I think, thematically unified, and Lost Highway is just... it's a vibe from start to finish, man. It has the right amount of surrealism to keep you interested and to make discussing it interesting, while not enough to make it incredibly confusing, which I think maybe some people will say about, Mulholland Drive, because it is certainly an even more surreal film than this one.
As I said before, the thing with Mulholland Drive, and maybe this is why David Lynch did go off the rails a little bit. I mean, it's like what Duncan says. I think when you let normies dictate what surreality is, you kind of get like, when something has the authentic note of like the absurd. And it can't really exist. Like, David Lynch isn't that. David Lynch has this, like, his stories are told in a very like I say, they're told in a very non-conventional manner, but you can still, if you engage with the material, follow the thread of the stories. And I remember at the time when Twin Peaks was on TV, as a teenager, having to listen to adults talking about a TV show I'm watching as a teenager, and they are morons and don't get it. And it's so weird, isn't it? What about the lady?
They
with
really
the
were.
log?
Who killed her? Is it like Dallas? Who killed her?
Like, I'm fucking 14 or something and I get this. What the fuck are you talking about? The log lady, is she like, oh my God. Like, so, there was this like level of insufferability. And I think definitely Lost Highway suffered from the same, right? Like, this is pretty much, if you just engage with the material, there's one or two little flourishes and extra interpretations you can give, like what we talked about. But ultimately, I think the story is relatively straightforward if you approach it as like, just a roadmap of someone's broken psyche. I think you can engage with everything that's happening in there. But what I will then say is, okay, right? So you like weird, do you guys? And then I remember Mulholland Drive, and the weirdness was baked into the marketing. When we got the DVD, me and my wanky film mates at university, we were all jacked up. We got the DVD, and it had a piece of paper in it, and it said on it, 10 questions to understanding Mulholland Drive. Obviously, we'll talk about this on the episode, but basically it was like questions like, who is the man behind Winkies? And things like this. And it was like 10 questions, and it was like, so, it's a great mystery, a great riddle we have to solve. David Lynch's material wasn't like that. It wasn't like you were walking through a maze of film and you had to break your brain to understand it. Yet Mulholland Drive was marketed that way. And so that does make me a little bit nervous for the rewatch, because ultimately what I've found is David Lynch is just a very specific type of filmmaker. It's not that he's bizarre, surreal, inaccessible. He just has his own style. He's so unique to himself.
Flair. Bro, that's it. I don't think generally he's putting that much extra illusion. I think that's why, by the way, people think he's just like sort of, it's kayfabe. People think when he says that in the interviews, Monty, there is no special meaning, or, like, I don't have to say. People think he's just playing it cool, like, that means there's an extra meaning, though. Like, he's just not giving us the clues, the master. I think actually this is just his flair. His flair is the surreal.
I mean, I also think that people don't understand.
Retcon, I think.
Yeah, people also just don't understand that artists just have vibes and they just feel a certain way and they're compelled to manifest it, but it's not something that they're actively planning. It's not some, there's different kinds of authors. There's Agatha Christie, who is adding all the little clues that add up to the bigger picture, but that's Agatha Christie, man. That's not going to be, it's not 100 Years of Solitude. It's not, fantasy, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, fantasy realism, right? There's different kinds of things. And I think David Lynch defies expectations because he is putting these feelings up on screen and he's asking questions like, what would it be like to be O.J. Simpson and in a theoretical psychogenic fugue? And how would a character feel that way? and what kind of things in the subconscious of their mind, what symbols or characters would manifest for this whore Madonna relationship. And so those are things that are going to be interpreted because they're symbols by different people. And not every symbol has an absolute concrete meaning or even a concrete connection to a different symbol. Sometimes you just kind of have to soak it in and make your own interpretations over what happened. And people don't like that for whatever reason, especially critics fucking hate that.
Yeah, well, yeah, the bad ones seem to, at least.
But I mean, there are famous. There's this is art critics hate this, and literary critics hate this. Like, this is why Ulysses is such a complicated work. Some of these things have lots of symbols or lots of apparent connections, but tying them all together is quite difficult and isn't always going to be the end of a Sherlock Holmes mystery where everything is in its rightful place by the end, and that's okay.
I would have liked an alternate ending where Fred says, when he's speeding off at the end on the Lost Highway, he says, "I'm going to find my wife's real killer," and then writes a book called "If I Had Done It," and gets a ton of royalties.
It's like, but what was that about? What book? And did what? Like, it wasn't you. That was the other guy.
Yeah, Roger Ebert. Yeah, Roger Ebert. Yeah, I just don't understand what's happening here. Yeah, just ridiculous.
Well, also the point about David Lynch and kind of running with vibes. I mean, you mentioned kind of his unconventional casting. I mean, famously in Twin Peaks, the guy who played Bob was like a set designer. He wasn't even an actor. And David Lynch just saw him and said, "Whoa, you look crazy. Let's put you in the show as the crazy murderer demon."
A manifestation of a father's abuse of his own daughter. And if somebody offered me that part, I'm just like, nah, I'm good, actually.
But Robert Blake as the mystery man, Blake was the one who gave himself the weird haircut and painted himself white like kabuki makeup. So kabuki's Japanese, a form of Japanese theater where everybody wears white makeup. Now they also have like crazy, other colors on their, for example, their eyes, and it's supposed to, they're supposed to be symbolically. I think what's interesting about kabuki is that there are specific sets of makeup for specific kinds of characters, so they're all symbols in a way, which makes sense for an emanation of the subconscious, like we're saying the mystery man here is, or a part of the psychology. But he was the actor did this, and David Lynch just saw it and was like, "You nailed it. Let's go." He's collaborating with the people to get the feel around him. And it feels like being on a David Lynch set's a very organic process where he's constantly seeing things and making changes for what feels right. But it's not like it's pre-planned.
I actually didn't think about it being Robert Blake because, obviously Robert Blake was in like some fucking really cool like cult movies like Electric Light in Blue. It's like, that's a fucking hood classic from the 70s. But it's like, it is an interesting approach to the he is unrecognizable in that, actually. Like, he's fucking wild.
But he did that to himself. Yeah. He apparently shaved his eyebrows, slicked his hair back and painted his face white. And he just made this decision, and David Lynch just rolled with it.
That's crazy. But yeah, I actually was pleasantly surprised. I had my fears. I had my fears for Lost Highway. I had a lot of fun with Wild at Heart. Always loved Blue Velvet. Hadn't watched this in a long time. Didn't know what I was going to get. Forgot about how the production value, like easily, as I said, with maybe the exception of Mulholland Drive, best looking film. I think in terms of being quintessentially Lynch, it might be his best film, as in there are all these little... In some of his other movies, there's all these like little hawky elements that he includes, and there's like one scene where you go, "Well, that's just silly. That just shouldn't be there." And like you say with the Wizard of Oz stuff in Wild at Heart, it's like you can take that out, and the movie still holds up. It might even hold up better. Who knows? But like this seemed to be the best David Lynch movie in the sense it is the best representation of David Lynch's art. Like what he wants to do as a filmmaker. I'd always thought in my brain it was Mulholland Drive. I might change my opinion next week, but I was very pleasantly surprised. This is a solid 8 out of 10 movie. Like, that's high praise.
I'll just say, not only is it my favorite David Lynch film, although look, we'll see on Mulholland Drive what to go with that one. I just remember this one most vividly. It held up as well when I rewatched it. Thought it was really good. I would just say, I kind of touched on what you just said there. To me, if you think of everything people think of with David Lynch, this is like the center with all the overlaps in the Venn diagram. Other ones have elements, as you say, the surrealism's almost forced and Wild at Heart. You do all these. It's got the creepiness of the Blue Velvet. It's got the sort of like, is it a dream? Is this a projection of Mulholland Drive? It's got all the things that his whole career basically, but then it overlaps very, very well. And then I think also it's just an audio and visual feast. I know that is an overused cliche, but like it's a cliche for a reason, because when you deliver like this, it's just fucking awesome to watch. It's also a film, by the way, like I say, you could skip the first hour or whatever of our discussion. Just put this on and the whole little protection scene, close the fucking curtains, and just enjoy the movie. You'll just enjoy it as a film.
I had a hard time getting it. I won't lie. In the UK, it was a tough one. We had to get creative, let's say. But
it's on the Criterion channel, the streaming service.
Yeah,
that's where I watched it.
Yeah. But it was. I was able to get it and watch it on a big flat screen, and like it is just a beautiful film. Like, I mean, it's really, really. It's like I said, there's something about it. Like, I don't know enough about the technicalities of filmmaking, but he did something different on this movie than he did on Wild at Heart and Blue. Just the look, if you instantly put them side by side, you would know. I don't know what it is. Somebody.
I will say, if you look up the cinematography, didn't do those films. He did some like an early Lynch thing, but then he only did Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, going on from that. So as far as I know, like the cinematography guy probably was different in that sense.
Which also means he probably worked with him on Inland Empire, which is sad. Yeah,
not sure on that one.
Big sad, but yeah, just beautiful film. Like lots of fun, and also sometimes movies, I think like you just throw a film on, and who doesn't want to be like a little bit weirded out or have a movie get under your skin a little bit? Like, sometimes you just want a simple story told well. But I like movies that reward rewatches. I like movies that make you think for a few days after you watch them. And this is definitely that, and it makes you think about it in a way that, I think you can come to your own satisfying conclusions. They might be a little bit different for everyone that watches the film, but I don't think you're going to tie yourself up in knots over this or argue with it over a beer with a friend like we did with Mulholland Drive, trying to get to the bottom of it all. This is just a very solid movie that has this. It has the layer on the surface, and you can peel away several layers, but you do get to the core quite quickly. It's like I say, it's not a maze of a movie. This is just a good, solid story.
And if you didn't like Lost Highway, you definitely will not like Mulholland Drive. So
no, that's fair to say.
You definitely will not like Mulholland Drive.
Yeah. It's okay though. They've got the Robert Eggers arc around the corner finally.
Oh, that's right. We'll be doing the Eggers arc after this. I know we promised to do it, but then David Lynch, unfortunately.
David Lynch had to fucking die, didn't he?
Yeah.
So by the way, many such cases at the moment. We lost another one today, so pouring one out for Gene Hackman, a real one. So
yeah. But we will be doing the Eggers arc next, guys. It is obviously the 4 films that you're thinking about. Those 4 films are the only 4 films: The Witch, The Lighthouse, The Northman, and Nosferatu.
And the good news is, for all of those movies, Roger Ebert was dead. So, whatever. We don't have to read his reviews, is what I'm saying. So
I mean, but his website is still alive. The zombie form of Roger Ebert.
Yeah,
so somebody was reviewing those on his website.
Yeah, I've read some of those newer reviews. They're not that bad, actually. They they're not that bad. They're better than him. So. All right, then.
All right, that's it.
Wrap it up, Monty.
Mulholland Drive next week. We'll see you then.